And once again, you see it here in this age as well, in this day, where we allow it to get so bad. Because somehow we have this idea of defending ourselves, defending truth, defending what we stand for. Like, defending the Bible is an unbiblical thing to do. Alright, so we are back again.
So last week we had load shedding, which means we had no power.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a weekly, monthly thing in South Africa.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has gotten better, but...
Yeah. So today's video, we're going to do a reaction. It's basically history.
Yeah, well, we're going to be discussing the Crusades and the actual history behind them and the cause of it, the reason for it, and why it was in fact a justified thing to do. So yeah, I think it's important that we learn about history and we learn about the truth of history, not the curated one that fits certain agendas.
Yeah. And we actually don't really learn. We actually allow things to repeat itself.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and as we'll see in the video, unfortunately it does seem like Christianity has got a bend toward allowing things to happen, and then it gets really, really bad. But yeah, let us get into it.
This video is my visual interpretation of Raymond Ibrahim's book, Defenders of the West. If you're looking to understand the Crusades through just one book, this is it. I highly recommend purchasing a copy for yourself. The first chapter of the book explores the reasons behind the Crusades and introduces Duke Godfrey as a central leader. Due to its length, I've divided the 3D animation visualization of the first chapter into several videos. Beginning in the 4th century, as the Roman Empire started to Christianize, Jerusalem, where Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected, gained significant importance and emerged as the focal point of pilgrimage. In the 330s, Constantine the Great commanded,
"Construct a grand temple complex on the site of Christ's burial. Uncover the true cross, made from fragments of the execution instrument, and enshrine it within the temple."
Yes, sire.
Then the Grand Temple was built under the Emperor's order, and it became known as the Holy Sepulchre. The temple became known as the Holy Sepulchre. Both the temple and the cross would hold immense significance for Christendom and profoundly influence the trajectory of this video series. Constantine died in the year of 337. Precisely 300 years after Constantine's death, the Arabs, who had recently unified under the banner of Islam, conquered Jerusalem from the Eastern Roman Empire in 637. Thereafter, the Christians of the Holy Land were, generation after generation, persecuted to the point of slaughter and destruction, suffered at the hands of Muslim rulers. For example, in the early 8th century, 70 Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem were tortured and executed for refusing to convert to Islam. Seven who converted were spared. Some years after that, another 60 pilgrims were crucified in Jerusalem, In the late 8th century, Muslims destroyed 2 churches and a monastery near Bethlehem. They also slaughtered its monks. In 796, Muslims burned another 20 monks to death. In 809, and again in 813, multiple monasteries, convents, and churches were attacked in and around Jerusalem. Christians of both sexes were ganked and massacred. On Palm Sunday of 929, another wave of atrocities broke out. Churches were destroyed and Christians slaughtered. Not every Muslim leader was committed to the destruction of churches and persecution of Christians. Some were more pragmatic, leaving Dimas alone on payment of jizya and acceptance of social inferiority. That said, and as in other Muslim-occupied territories, whether the next ruler would be radical or moderate, to use an anachronistic but familiar dichotomy, was always a coin flip away. As for the Muslim populace, then as now, mobs were always ready to rise against and plunder Christians under any pretext. Even the Holy Sepulchre, Christendom's most sacred church, was not spared. In 936, the Muslims in Jerusalem made a rising and burnt down the church, which they plundered and destroyed all they could of it, records one Muslim chronicler. Similarly, in 1009, Fatimid Caliph Hakim bi-Amr Allah ordered one of his officials,
Destroy the Sepulchre Church and have the people plunder it so thoroughly all traces of it were obliterated.
They did exactly that. Such wanton vandalism
plunged the entire church and the city of Rome into deep grief and distress.
To quote the Pope of the time, Sergius the Ford. Not content, Hakim further ordered the destruction of, according to Muslim accounts, some 30,000 churches throughout Egypt and Greater Syria. Although a much smaller church was rebuilt over the sepulchre of Christ in 1048, this church also remained under threat. Subsequent Muslim rulers permitted Christians to rebuild the church due to the significant revenues generated by Christian pilgrimages, despite the risk of another infidel church being destroyed. As William of Tyre, an important Crusades chronicler born and raised in the Holy Land, writes, when the Muslims desired to exact anything by force from either the patriarch or the people, any delay in rendering obedience was immediately followed by the threat that the church would be pulled down. Around the same time the sepulchre was being rebuilt, the Seljuk Turks rose to power in Afghanistan and eastern Iran in the 1040s, occupied Baghdad in 1055, keeping the Abbasid caliphs as figureheads, and continued marching westward into Syria. No other Muslim peoples would come to spearhead the jihad as the Turks had. Both friend and foe attest to their martial prowess and religious zeal. As Bernard Lewis writes, the converted Turks sank their national identity in Islam as the Arabs and Persians had never done. Accordingly, under Turkish influence, Islam regained the zeal of the early Arab conquests and reopened holy war against its Christian foes on a significant scale. Matters went from bad to worse for the people of the ancient Christian region of Asia Minor, the future Turkey, particularly those on its easternmost edge, where the Turks first began to invade, namely the Armenians. Hundreds of thousands of these Christians were either massacred or enslaved, and thousands of churches were torched or transformed into mosques. The pivotal moment came in 1071, after the decisive Turkish victory over the Eastern Roman Empire at Manzikert, which opened the rest of the Anatolian plain to Turkic Islam. Then, the Seljuk Sultan Muhammad bin Dawud Chagri, or Alp Arslan, called on his followers,
"Run through the countryside day and night. Slay the Christians and do not spare any mercy on them."
Eagerly, they obliged and penetrated westward. As a result, cities were obliterated, lands were plundered, and the whole of Romaioi, or Anatolia, was stained with Christian blood, writes the Eastern Roman princess Anna Komnene. All that was left were devastated fields, trees cut down, mutilated corpses, and towns driven mad by fear or in flames. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who reigned from 1081 to 1118, recounted his people's travails.
How hard the most holy Roman Christian empire is being pressed by the Turks, pillaged daily and constantly raided, with Christians being murdered and mocked in various indescribable ways. Not only did the Muslim invaders defile the holy places in innumerable ways and destroy them, but they would circumcise Christian boys and youths above Christian baptismal fonts, pour the blood from the circumcision into the fonts in mockery of Christ, force them to urinate on it, and then drag them round the church and force them to blaspheme the name and faith of the Holy Trinity. Those who refuse are subjected to various punishments and eventually killed. As for Christian women, the Muslim invaders took virgins and made them public prostitutes. Mothers were violated in the presence of their daughters, over and over again by different men, while their daughters were compelled not only to watch, but to sing obscene songs and to dance. Then they changed places, and the suffering, which is painful and shameful to speak of, was inflicted upon the daughters, while the filthy activity was adorned by the obscene songs of the unfortunate mothers. When the female sex was not spared, they became worse than animals, breaking all human laws by turning on men. Their lust overflowed to the point that the execrable and profoundly intolerable crime of sodomy, which they committed against men of middle or low station,
Queers from Palestine,
they also committed against a certain bishop, killing him.
A medieval prelate and chronicler named William of Tyre lamented that conditions scarcely better in the Holy Land.
Jerusalem's Christians endured even greater hardships under the Turks, making their past tribulations under the Egyptian Fatimids and the Persian Abbasids seem comparatively lighter in retrospect. Death threatened them every day, and what was worse than death, the fear of servitude, harsh and intolerable, ever lowered before them.
William proceeds to offer a typical example.
Even as the Christians celebrated their holy rites, the Turkish enemy would violently force their way into the churches, which had been painstakingly restored and preserved after earlier destruction under the Egyptians and Persians. Utterly without reverence for the consecrated places, they sat upon the very altars and struck terror to the heart of the worshippers with their mad cries and whistlings. They overturned the chalices, trod underfoot the utensils devoted to the divine offices, broke the marble statues, and showered blows and insults upon the clergy. The Lord Patriarch, then in office, was dragged from his seat by hair and beard and thrown to the ground. Again and again he was seized and thrust into prison without cause. Treatment fit only for the lowest slave was inflicted upon him in order to torture his people, who suffered with him as with a father.
Nor were European pilgrims to Jerusalem spared. As the Turks were ruling the lands of Syria and Palestine, they inflicted injuries on Christians who went to pray in Jerusalem, beat them, pillaged them, and levied the poll tax or jizya. Moreover, every time they saw a caravan of Christians, particularly of those from Rome and the lands of Italy, they made every effort to cause their death in diverse ways. It was in this abysmal context that, at the Council of Clermont on November 27, 1095, Pope Urban II called for what came to be known as the First Crusade. After describing to the assembled lords and nobles the plight of Eastern Christendom under Islam, he cried,
"Who is to repair this damage if you do not do it? Rise up and remember the manly deeds of your ancestors, including the prowess and greatness of Charlemagne."
For the martial knights of the West, hearing of the aforementioned Muslim atrocities against Christendom was intolerable. Thus, when Urban concluded by calling on them to undertake an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem, with the twin goals of defending fellow Christians and liberating the sepulchre of Christ. With one voice, all in assembly cried out, "God wills it." Thereafter, and in the words of the contemporary Armenian chronicler, Matthew of Edessa, who lived circa 1075 to 1144,
all the peoples of Italy and Spain, right up to the confines of Africa, and even the distant Frankish nation, began to move and surged forth in a formidable and immense throng. They were very much like the sands of the seas, which are beyond the mind's calculation. The noblemen of the Frankish nation rose up and came forth. Each of them came with his troops to aid the Christians, to deliver the holy city of Jerusalem from the infidels, and to free the holy sepulchre from the hands of the Muslims. They were illustrious men of royal blood, endowed with piety and faith, and brought up in the practice of good works. Here are the names of these Franks.
First to be named in Matthew's list is Godfrey, a mighty man from the lineage of the Roman emperors. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far, please consider supporting the author Raymond Ibrahim by purchasing his book, Defenders of the West.
They can't build something of their own. They have to take things away.
Yeah.
And it's very much like what is happening in South Africa.
It is. It is pretty much exactly what's happening in South Africa.
We can't build companies, we can't build schools, we can't build houses, so we'll just actually take yours. By people.
With the land appropriation. Expropriation. Yeah. And just going back to that, it's just, once again, it is Christianity, well, should I say mainstream Christianity, has got this bent towards, because Christianity is quote unquote a religion of peace, we will allow it to get that bad. They waited 400 years. The attack started in 630 something, I think, and the first crusade only began in 1095. So it was 400 years of allowing it to get that bad before they decided to do anything. And once again, you see it here in this age as well, in this day, where we allow it to get so bad because somehow we have this idea of defending ourselves, defending truth, defending what we stand for. Like, defending the Bible is an unbiblical thing to do. Defending Christ is an unbiblical thing to do. Yet Christ himself says, go buy a sword in Luke 22, I think?
Yeah, Luke 22 verse 36.
Yeah, and it's this idea of, defending yourself is a unchristian thing to do. But to answer all the people that would say, yeah, but look at the Old Testament, look at all the atrocities. If you read it, it was done for a reason, and slaves were allowed to be set free.
Yeah.
After, I believe, 7 years in the Old Testament.
Yeah, during the 7th year, or when it became the 7th year.
And bloodshed is never condoned within Christendom. It's a last resort, as opposed to the Quran, which it's mandated on Muslims, according to Quran, to do bloodshed.
Yes.
That's the difference between the two religions. Christianity doesn't condone it, as opposed to Islam, which does. In order to be a follower of Islam, a true follower, you have to do that.
Yeah, and it's like you are actually being taxed to be a second-class citizen.
Yeah, that's it. And if you refuse to, if you do convert to Islam, so if you do convert, they won't kill you, but then you are a second-class citizen, and you have to pay jizya.
Still.
Yeah.
I mean, like...
Even in the Old Testament, there was no mention of slaves had to pay.
No. Yeah. And like, I cannot understand how churches are just handing over the church. There's no fighting, and then you get mainstream media that is starting to actually accuse us of like rape and murder and that.
Yeah. And how they spin it as, we're the aggressors.
Yeah.
And once again, you saw there, it started off with Christians and Jews who were just minding their own business. They were in Jerusalem. So when they want to talk about October the 7th and they want to bring up, okay, yes, it happened to the Jews. The Muslims came and invaded the Jews, but what did the Jews do to cause it? Okay, but then we have to go back into history and we have to find out who were the ones that first started the actual aggression. If you want to start this whole tit for tat thing, you have to go back all the way to the first instance. Who was the ones that initially started the aggression? Because as we saw there, 30,000 churches were destroyed in Syria and Egypt. By implication, the Christians, quote unquote, won those countries, but they won them not in bloodshed, but they won them with sharing the gospel, the good news of Christ. And they won those countries in a sense because of love.
Yeah.
They won them not with bloodshed, not with the sword or anything. So they Christianized those countries, and the people adopted Christianity because they wanted to. So 30,000 churches, by implication, the fact that they could destroy 30,000 churches implied that there was 30,000 churches to begin with. So Christianity had quite a strong hold there already, and it was voluntarily done. It wasn't by force. The people chose to adopt Christianity. So, because there was no bloodshed, where was the first bloodshed that happened? The first bloodshed happened when the Muslims decided to come and invade. The Christians didn't invade those countries. They simply shared the gospel, and the gospel spread, and it affected people's hearts, and they were like,
yes,
the God of the Bible is a true God.
Yeah.
He seems kind and merciful.
Yeah, and he's not a slave master.
Yeah.
You know, that actually comes and rapes and kills and just, it's mine.
Yeah. And these are the kind of things that get glossed over, and this kind of history doesn't get talked about. It's always the Christians and the Jews are the aggressors.
Yeah.
Not according to actual history. If you would just take the time and switch off mainstream media and switch off...
And just find out stuff for yourself and actually don't go there with your own thing of it's just like lies.
Yeah, and the problem is these people who are supporting Palestine, supporting Hamas, I get that they're doing it out of fear, but the thing is, cowards are dangerous people.
Yes, they are.
You're in fear for your own life. You know what? So you're going to go ahead and you're going to continually support the people that are putting your life in danger. Like, look, at the end of the day, death is going to come.
Yes. One way
or another.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you're not going to stand up for truth, like that is Stockholm Syndrome. You are knowingly supporting the people that are putting your life in danger, and you're continually spreading the message because you're afraid for your own life.
Yeah. And it's like you actually supporting, how can I put this? You're actually supporting people who want to make you a slave.
And then, in the grander scheme of it, you're supporting people that are dangerous. and you're propagating the message of your support toward them, you know that they're dangerous people, so you know that if you spread the message, they are going to spread. And then you're putting other people's lives in danger. By you not condemning it.
Cowards.
Because you're too concerned about your own skin. And again, if you're a Christian, it's even doubly worse. Because you should know the truth.
Yeah. But if you actually take it, there's a lot of people in churches that are actually on the fence.
Yeah, and I was just about to bring up, there's far too many people these days that don't have an opinion.
Yeah.
As if ignorance is going to save you. As if not being aware of these things is going to somehow make it okay. I would say you're choosing to be ignorant.
Yeah.
You want to be ignorant because you have the mentality of, an ignorant person is going to be spared.
Will you?
No, you won't. And the thing is, you have to live with yourself, knowing that you had the opportunity to learn, knowing that you had the opportunity to find out these things, and you chose not to, because once again, it goes back to you're scared for your own skin.
Yeah, and you try to make everybody happy.
Yeah.
And it comes down to fear of man.
Yeah.
And for too long we have been told to come to church and just be quiet.
Yeah. And you look at all the atrocities that happen, you look at what's happening now to the church, still persecutions, still beheadings, still murderings. Nigeria's probably the most recent one that I know about.
Horrific, yeah.
And everybody glosses over it because it's, it's too sad to find out. So, you know what, let's bury our heads in the sand because it's, I don't want to get bogged down by those kind of things.
Yeah. And then you really have to actually think, do we really care?
Well, that's it, yeah. Especially if you're a Christian and you claim to have experienced the love of God and you know what Jesus Christ did for you. If God is love, and that love has been shed abroad in your heart, as Paul says, love should cause you to also disagree with things.
Yes, yeah. I'm just thinking now that we'd rather have a beautiful, fancy church with like nice soft chairs and carpets and waves the arms around and that.
And tickles people's ears with these inclusive sermons so as not to offend.
Yeah, so I think it's time that we, actually got together and actually spoke about things that matter.
I think a great start would just be to start to disagree.
Yeah.
Like if people want to know what to do and they feel the compulsion of, I agree with what you're saying, and it's start to be okay with disagreement.
And yes, make waves.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I mean, if you look at the detrimental issues that are happening in the world, it's because people haven't disagreed enough.
Yeah.
If you as a Christian can see the way that the world is going, if you can see that it's going away from God, which it has been for decades, start by disagreeing.
And so what if there are church friends or people in your family that frown at you and call you names?
Yeah, I mean,
it's not what the Bible says about you.
When you get to heaven, they're not going to be your judge.
No. Yeah, so, I think it's time to actually make waves.
I think to encourage people, if anything, to start making waves wherever you are. If there's things that don't line up, don't just make waves for the sake of making waves, but if you can see the Bible and reality are not on the same trajectory, it's incumbent on the Christian to stand up and say, I disagree. Because the current issues in the world are because Christians haven't disagreed. The issues in the world and the things that are going terrible in the world, it's because not enough people have stood up and disagreed.
Yeah, I think it's fear of man.
Well, it is fear of man, but it's, you know, it's once again, man is not going to be the judge.
Yeah. And to get over this thing about, oh, God bless me, bless me. If you're in a third world country or a first world country and people don't want to actually hear God actually talking to them, saying...
Precisely, yeah. If you're concerned about still the prosperity gospel and stuff, you know, it's more incumbent then, if you want to be blessed by God, it's more incumbent then to disagree and stand up. Because then, if enough people do that, economies will start getting fixed.
Yeah. Yes.
Once economies start getting fixed, jobs can potentially open up. People will potentially have more money to give because they've got more money that they've received.
Yeah. And that's how it works.
Yeah. So, I think that's it.
That's it.
And we will see you guys on the next one.